The call wouldn't connect. A cold, robotic voice repeated the same sterile phrase, "The number you have dialed is not in service." But Genevieve knew it was a lie. It was a digital guillotine, severing the last thread of connection to her husband, Sterling Thorne. Just an hour earlier, her obstetrician had confirmed the faint, fluttering heartbeat of their child. She clutched the precious ultrasound photo in one hand and her phone in the other, a chilling realization dawning in her heart. He hadn't just ignored her call. He had erased her. While she was carrying his heir, he was on a plane, whisking his mistress away to paradise, believing he had silenced his inconvenient wife for good. He had no idea he hadn't just blocked a number. He had unleashed a storm. The silence in the penthouse was a physical entity. It pressed in on Genevieve from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, a view that once felt like the pinnacle of a dream, and now seemed like the vista from a gilded cage. Each of the 26 rooms in their Fifth Avenue duplex was a monument to Sterling's success and her isolation. The Italian marble was cold under her bare feet. The abstract art on the walls felt mocking in its starkness, and the air, filtered and climate-controlled, was thin and sterile, devoid of the warmth of a true home. Genevieve traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, her fingers trembling slightly. It was from a set Sterling had bought at an auction in Vienna, a casual $100,000 purchase he'd mentioned in passing. Everything was like that, a grand gesture with no genuine emotion behind it. Their marriage, she was beginning to understand, was his grandest acquisition of all. He hadn't wanted a partner. He'd wanted a beautiful, well-bred accessory to complete the portrait of Sterling Thorne, the self-made tech magnate. And she had played the part so well. Genevieve Hale, the quiet art history graduate from a good but not wealthy family, had been swept off her feet by his ferocious ambition and laser-focused charm. He pursued her with the same intensity he applied to a hostile takeover, showering her with gifts, flying her to Paris for dinner, and whispering promises of a shared future, a dynasty. She had fallen in love not just with the man, but with the intoxicating whirlwind he created. The whirlwind had long since subsided, leaving behind a cold, predictable stillness. The past year had been a slow erosion of intimacy. Dinners became business meetings with his fork and knife clinking against the plate as he scrolled through market reports on his phone. Conversations became monologues about his company, Thorne Dynamics, and its revolutionary data encryption software. His touch when it came felt perfunctory, a checkbox on a list of spousal duties. The discovery had been as banal as it was devastating. A receipt from a jeweler Cartier for a diamond tennis bracelet she had never received tucked into the pocket of a suit jacket meant for the dry cleaner. Then the hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, his back turned to her, the murmur of a woman's laughter, just barely audible on the breeze. He called it handling a sensitive client. The late nights at the office became more frequent his scent when he returned home, not of stale office coffee, but of a floral perfume she didn't wear. The name she learned from a sympathetic doorman who saw more than he let on was Catalina, a model and influencer, a woman whose life was as glossy and curated as her social media feed. Genevieve had confronted him, her voice quiet but shaking with the force of her heartbreak. Sterling hadn't even had the decency to look guilty. He'd simply stared at her with his cool grey eyes, the eyes that could charm investors and eviscerate competitors, and had gaslighted her with infuriating calm. "You're being emotional, darling," he'd said, adjusting his Patek Philippe watch. "Catalina is a brand ambassador. My relationship with her is purely professional. You're stressed. It's not good for you." He made her feel insane, paranoid, as if the reality she was piecing together was a fiction of her own making. Then came the pregnancy, It was unplanned, a small miracle in the frozen landscape of their marriage. A flicker of hope ignited within Genevieve. His child would change everything. It would have to. A baby would be the anchor that would bring him back to her, back to them. It would transform their hollow penthouse into a home, fill the suffocating silence with life. She told him the news over a tense dinner, her heart pounding. His reaction was unnervingly placid. A slow smile, a brief kiss on her forehead. Well, he'd said, his mind already drifting back to his tablet. A Thorn heir. Good for the legacy. That was 2 months ago. Since then, his distance had grown into a chasm. He used the pregnancy as another excuse for his absence. You need your rest, Genevieve. I don't want to disturb you with my late hours. He was protecting her, he claimed, while he was slowly, methodically erasing her from his life. Which brought her to this moment. This morning she'd woken up to a wave of nausea and a sharp, terrifying cramp. Panicked, she had called her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, who had squeezed her in for an emergency appointment. For 2 hours she sat alone in the waiting room, surrounded by beaming couples, her fingers twisting the diamond on her ring. Sterling hadn't answered his phone. She'd left 3 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. Everything is perfectly fine. Dr. Miller had finally said, her warm smile, a stark contrast to the terror icing Genevieve's veins. The baby is strong. See, there's the heartbeat. And on the screen, a tiny pulsating flicker of light. A miracle. Overcome with relief and joy, Genevieve had wanted to share the news immediately. This surely would break through his armor. She took a photo of the ultrasound printout and sent it to him, her message bubbling with love. Our baby is perfect, a strong little heartbeat. I love you so much. The message never delivered. A small red exclamation mark appeared beside it. Message failed to send. Confused, she tried to call him, and that's when she heard it, the robotic voice. The number you have dialed is not in service. She tried again, and again. The same result. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a network error. It was a deliberate act. He had blocked her. On the day she confirmed their child's heartbeat, he had severed their connection. A quick, desperate search on her laptop confirmed her deepest fears. A gossip site, a place she never visited, had a fresh post. Blurry paparazzi photos of Sterling Thorn and model Catalina Vargas boarding a private jet at Teterboro Airport. The headline read, Tech Titan, Thorn whisking away. Model muse to Laukala Island for a billionaire's birthday bash. Laukala Island, Fiji, one of the most exclusive private resorts in the world. A place for billionaires to play, far from the prying eyes of the world. Far from his pregnant wife. The teacup slipped from her numb fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound was sharp, violent in the oppressive quiet. She didn't flinch. She just stared at the broken porcelain, a perfect metaphor for her life. He hadn't just left. He had tried to break her, to leave her in pieces in their silent, empty home. For a long moment, she felt nothing but a vast, black emptiness. The betrayal was so absolute, so cruel, it was beyond tears. He was on a private island with another woman celebrating while she was here, alone with the photo of their unborn child. He thought she was just another beautiful object he could discard when a newer model caught his eye. He thought her pregnancy was an inconvenience he could simply ignore. He thought that by blocking her number he had won. But as Genevieve stared at her reflection in the polished surface of the grand piano, she saw not just a heartbroken woman, but a flicker of something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was a cold, hard ember of rage. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her gentleness for stupidity. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Thorne. He had forgotten that before him she had survived on her own wits, that she was smarter than he ever gave her credit for. He had built an empire, Thorne Dynamics, a fortress of wealth and power, and he thought he was untouchable inside it. But Genevieve had spent the last 3 years living inside that fortress. She knew its layout. She had overheard conversations, seen documents left on his desk, and listened intently during his self-important monologues about corporate strategy. She knew the names. She knew the secrets. He had left her with nothing but the truth, and she was beginning to realize the truth was the most powerful weapon of all. She picked up her phone, her hand steady now. She didn't dial Sterling's number. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in over a year, a friend she had foolishly let drift away in the undertow of her marriage. The phone rang twice before a sharp, no-nonsense voice answered. "Beatrice, you have 10 seconds to convince me this isn't a pocket dial." A small, humorless smile touched Genevieve's lips. "Bea," she said, her voice low and clear, the sound of shattering porcelain still echoing in her ears. "I need a lawyer, the best one you know, and I need to burn an empire to the ground." The water surrounding Lokala Island was a shade of turquoise, so vivid it seemed unreal, a photoshopped fantasy brought to life. White sand beaches, fringed groves of coconut palms, and the air was thick with the scent of salt and exotic flowers. From their private overwater villa, a sprawling structure of wood and glass, with its own infinity pool melting into the horizon, Sterling Thorne watched Catalina Vargas pose for a selfie. She arched her back, pouted her surgically perfected lips, and angled her phone to best capture the diamond bracelet, the one he'd bought her last month, sparkling on her slender wrist. "The lighting here is just divine, Sterling," she purred, not taking her eyes off her own reflection. "My followers are going to die of envy." "That's the point, isn't it?" Sterling replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass of 25-year-old Macallan. He felt a familiar, fleeting pang of something akin to boredom. Catalina was stunning, a flawless piece of human art, but she was also profoundly simple. Her motivations were as transparent as the water beneath their villa money fame and the validation of strangers online. It was a transaction, and for now it suited him. She was a beautiful distraction, an uncomplicated symbol of his power. She didn't challenge him. She didn't have complicated emotional needs. And she looked magnificent on his arm. She was the opposite of Genevieve. Lately, Genevieve had become heavy. Her quiet disappointment, her sad eyes, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. It was suffocating. And then the pregnancy. An heir was a strategic necessity, of course a key part of his dynastic ambitions, but the reality of it, the impending mess of hormones, doctors, and the tedious business of fatherhood, was an unwelcome intrusion into his meticulously controlled world. He needed space. He needed to be reminded of who he was, not a soon-to-be father, trapped in a silent penthouse, but Sterling Thorne, the master of the universe. Blocking her number had been an impulse, a clean, decisive action that brought him a surprising amount of relief. It was a firewall against her escalating neediness. The frantic voicemails earlier had been the final straw. He was closing a multi-billion-dollar deal with a Japanese tech conglomerate. He couldn't be distracted by her anxieties. He'd deal with her and the baby when he returned. He would smooth things over with a ridiculously expensive gift and a plausible lie. He always did. She was gentle, forgiving. She would come around. "Are you thinking about work again?" Catalina pouted, sliding onto his lap. She ran a perfectly manicured finger down his chest. "I thought this trip was about celebrating your birthday." "No work allowed. Thorn dynamics is always working, my dear, he said, his focus already drifting. The market never sleeps, and neither do my competitors. He pulled out his own phone, a sleek, encrypted device that was his true lifeline. He scrolled through market updates. The stock was stable, trading high. Everything was exactly as it should be. The Japanese deal was in its final stages. Another victory was imminent. "Forget your competitors," Catalina whispered, kissing his neck. "I'm your only competition for your attention. Right now." He allowed himself to be distracted, pulling her closer. This was what he wanted. Simple, physical, transactional. No complications. No consequences. Here, on this isolated slice of paradise, he was king, and the world, his wife included, was 1,000,000 miles away. 1,000,000 miles away, in the heart of New York City, Genevieve felt like she was at the bottom of the ocean. The initial fire of her rage had cooled into a heavy, crushing weight of despair. After her call with Beatrice, the reality of her situation had crashed down on her. She was pregnant alone, and married to a man who considered her disposable. She wandered through the vast, empty rooms of the penthouse, each object a testament to a life that felt like a lie. She saw the photo albums from their wedding, a lavish affair at the plaza, meticulously planned by Sterling, to be a networking event as much as a celebration. She saw her collection of first-edition novels, which Sterling had once called a quaint little hobby. She saw the silver frame on her nightstand, holding a picture of them in Santorini, both smiling, but his eyes were looking past her, toward something on the horizon only he could see. For 24 hours she allowed herself to grieve. She cried until her head pounded and her eyes were swollen shut. She didn't eat. She lay in their cold, king-sized bed, curled around a pillow, the silence of the apartment, amplifying the frantic beating of her own heart and the tiny, fluttering life inside her. She felt the terrifying pull of victimhood, the urge to surrender to the pain and let it consume her. Sterling was too powerful, his wealth a shield she could never hope to penetrate. What could she possibly do? The turning point came on the second day in the form of a simple, mundane task. The automated grocery delivery arrived. As she numbly unpacked the organic kale artisanal cheese and Icelandic water, all part of the carefully curated lifestyle Sterling had designed for them, she saw the prenatal vitamins she had added to the list. She held the bottle in her hand, staring at the label. "For the healthy development of your child." And in that moment, something shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't about her broken heart or her shattered pride. A fierce, primal wave of protective instinct washed over her so potent it left her breathless. She was not just Genevieve Hale, the spurned wife. She was a mother. She was the sole protector of the tiny, vulnerable life that depended on her for everything. Her grief and despair didn't vanish, but they were burned away at the edges by a new, formidable resolve. She would not let her child be born into a world where their father could discard their mother like trash. She would not let Sterling control the narrative painting her as an unstable, emotional woman while he gallivanted around the world. Her child deserved more. Her child deserved a mother who fought back. The weakness fell away, replaced by a crystalline clarity. Sterling's greatest strength was his belief in his own invincibility, and that she realized was his greatest weakness. He would never see her coming. She walked into his home office, a space she rarely entered. It was a temple of chrome glass and black leather, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. She ran her hand over its polished surface. This was his throne room, the nexus of his power. He conducted his business from here, made and broke fortunes with a few taps on his keyboard. He assumed it was impregnable. but she had watched him. She had absorbed details without even realizing it. The way he nervously fiddled with a specific silver pen when a deal was going south, the name of his private wealth manager in Zurich, the muttered curses under his breath about a man named Pendleton from the early days of the company, a man Sterling clearly despised. She sat down in his leather chair. It felt cold and foreign, but she didn't shrink from it. She was no longer a guest in this life. She was a strategist planning a siege. Her phone buzzed. It was Beatrice. "Okay, I've cancelled my next 2 weeks. My associate will handle my other cases. Your war is now my war. First things first, we need leverage. Something he can't buy his way out of. Financial, personal, anything. What do you know about the foundations of Thorn Dynamics?" Genevieve looked around the silent office, at the framed magazine covers featuring Sterling's smug face at the awards for innovation glinting on the shelves. The foundations. Everyone thought Sterling Thorn had built his empire from scratch, a brilliant coder who had created an unbreakable encryption algorithm in his dorm room. It was his creation myth, the story he told every journalist. But Genevieve remembered a rare moment of vulnerability late one night after too much whiskey. He'd been talking about the early days, a nostalgic, slurring monologue. He'd mentioned his first partner, a man, he said, couldn't keep up, and had to be cut loose for the good of the company. He'd said the man's name with a particular sneer, a mix of contempt and something else, something that sounded almost like fear. Elias Vance. And then she remembered the other name, the one he cursed. Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton. He'd been the company's first chief engineer hired right at the beginning. According to Sterling, Pendleton was a bitter old man, put out to pasture in a do-nothing consultancy role years ago. A relic who didn't understand the new face of the company. A relic who might just remember everything. "I think I know where to start looking," Genevieve said to Beatrice, her voice devoid of any tremor. "I'm going to find a ghost." Finding Arthur Pendleton was both simpler and more complex than Genevieve had anticipated. He wasn't on social media, and a public records search yielded only a quiet address in a sleepy New Jersey suburb, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. He was, as Sterling had implied, a ghost in the modern machine. But Beatrice's legal firm had resources. Within a day they had a phone number. Making the call was the first real step into her new, uncertain future. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs as she dialed the number, scrawled on a notepad in front of her. What if he hung up? What if he was loyal to Sterling? What if he was just a bitter old man with no real information? An elderly, gruff voice answered on the third ring. "Pendleton." "Mr. Pendleton, my name is Genevieve Thorn," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Sterling Thorn's wife." There was a long, loaded silence on the other end of the line. She could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "I know who you are, Mrs. Thorn," he said, finally his tone unreadable. "I'm surprised it took you this long to call." The words hung in the air. "It took you this long." He knew. He had been waiting. "I need to understand the beginning," Genevieve said, skipping any pretense. "The real beginning of Thorn Dynamics, before the magazine covers and the IPO. I need to know about a man named Elias Vance." The sigh that came through the receiver was heavy, freighted with the weight of years. "That's not a conversation for the phone. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. The old reference library at the Schwartzman building on 42nd, 3rd floor, north reading room. Come alone." The line went dead. The next day, Genevieve dressed carefully. Not in the designer clothes Sterling preferred, but in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, her face free of makeup. She wanted to look like herself, not the woman Sterling had tried to mold. She took the subway into the city, the rumble of the train, a grounding force, the anonymity of the crowd a comfort. The Stephen A. Schwartzman Building, the main branch of the New York Public Library, was a majestic fortress of knowledge, guarded by its famous stone lions, patience and fortitude. Genevieve felt a pang of irony. She would need both. The North Reading Room was a cavernous space with soaring ceilings and long oak tables filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages and hushed coughs. She saw him immediately. He was an older man, stooped and thin, with a shock of white hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He was sitting at a corner table, a stack of dusty engineering textbooks beside him. He looked up as she approached, his gaze sharp and appraising. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. He didn't smile. "Mr. Pendleton, thank you for meeting me. Don't thank me yet." He grumbled, his voice a low rasp. "I've kept my mouth shut for 20 years. Loyalty, a misplaced sense of professional ethics, and a non-disclosure agreement with teeth like a great white shark. So tell me, why should I break that silence now?" Genevieve met his gaze directly. She didn't plead or offer him money. She offered him the one thing she had, the unvarnished truth. "Because he blocked my number and ran off to a private island with his mistress hours after I sent him the first ultrasound of his unborn child. Because the man who built an empire on the idea of secure connections has severed his most important one. And because I have a feeling that how he treats his family is built on the same foundation as how he built his company on a disposable person policy." Arthur Pendleton stared at her for a long time, his expression unchanging. Then he gave a short, sharp nod, as if she had just passed a critical test. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "I expected tears. Hysteria." "I'm fresh out," Genevieve replied flatly. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Sterling Thorne is a fraud. Not a financial fraud, not in a way the SEC could easily prove. He's something far worse. He's a thief of the soul." And then the story came pouring out of him. Arthur Pendleton had been the first employee of what was then called Vance Thorne Solutions. He was the veteran engineer brought in to build the practical architecture around the theoretical genius. And the genius he made clear was not Sterling Thorne. It was all Elias Pendleton said, his eyes distant, lost in memory. Elias Vance was a once-in-a-generation's mind. Quiet, socially awkward, lived in a world of pure code. He saw patterns in data, the way Mozart saw symphonies in the air. He designed the core of the Prometheus protocol. That's the real name for the encryption algorithm Thorne Dynamics is built on. It was revolutionary, a true quantum-proof encryption method. It wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. Sterling, in contrast, was the front man. He was handsome, charismatic, and brilliant at selling the dream. He handled the investors, the marketing, the business side. He and Elias were college roommates, a classic pairing of visionary and salesman. They were a perfect team. Pendleton continued, his voice laced with bitterness. Until the money started to look real. We were on the verge of a massive Series A funding round. Elias was dotting the I's on the final algorithm, making it perfect. Sterling was getting impatient. He saw the billions on the horizon and started seeing Elias not as a partner, but as an obstacle. According to Pendleton, Sterling began to subtly sideline Elias. He took meetings alone, started referring to it as my company in pitches, and created a narrative that Elias was the brilliant but unstable tech guy who needed Sterling's steady hand to function. The end came swiftly and brutally. Elias had a history of depression, Pendleton said, his gaze dropping to the table. It was something he struggled with, but he managed it. He was in a good place, excited about the launch. Then one weekend, Sterling called an emergency board meeting, just the three of us. He presented a fabricated medical report, full of psychiatric jargon, claiming Elias was having a breakdown, that he was a danger to the company. He said Elias was planning to sell the algorithm to a competitor. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated character assassination. Elias was blindsided, devastated. The argument was brutal. Sterling demanded Elias sign over his half of the company for a pittance, framing it as a generous buyout to help him get the care he needs. Elias refused, vowing to expose Sterling. 2 days later, Pendleton's voice cracked. Elias was dead. They found him in his apartment. Suicide, the police report said. An overdose. He left a note, but it just said, "I'm sorry." Sterling swooped in, played the part of the grieving friend and partner to perfection. He dedicated the company to Elias's memory and then proceeded to erase him from its history. He took Elias's algorithm, renamed it, patented it under his own name, and built an empire on his friend's grave. Pendleton had always suspected foul play, but he had no proof, just a deep, gut-wrenching certainty. Sterling had pushed Elias over the edge, manufactured the despair that led to his death. The NDA Sterling had him sign afterward was ironclad, and Pendleton, with a family to support, had been scared into silence. He took the consultancy role a form of golden cage and watched for 2 decades as Sterling Thorne became a global icon on the back of a dead man's genius. Genevieve sat in stunned silence, the air in the grand library suddenly feeling thin and cold. This was so much worse than an affair. It was a darkness she could never have imagined. Sterling wasn't just a cheat. He was a predator who had destroyed his partner and stolen his life's work. "Does anyone else know this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The truth," Pendleton snorted. A few of the other original engineers knew Elias was the brains, but they're all long gone, paid off or scared off. No one knows the whole story but me. And Sterling, of course. Is there any proof, anything tangible? Pendleton's eyes glinted with a spark of long-nurtured vengeance. Elias was meticulous. He kept backups of everything. Coded notes, early drafts of the algorithm server logs. Before he died, he was paranoid. Sterling was trying to lock him out of his own work. He sent me a package, an old-fashioned hard drive and a set of zip disks. Said it was insurance. I've kept it hidden for 20 years. I never knew what to do with it. Until now. He slid a small folded piece of paper across the table. It was the address of a storage unit in Queens and a key taped to the back. Sterling's creation myth is the heart of Thorne Dynamics' valuation, Pendleton said, his voice low and intense. The story of the lone genius in his dorm room. If the world found out that the algorithm was stolen, that the company was founded on a lie, and that the original genius partner died under questionable circumstances, the story changes. The stock, the board, the investors, they're not invested in a company, Mrs. Thorne. They're invested in a myth, and you now have the power to shatter it. Genevieve took the key. It felt impossibly heavy in her hand. It was the key to a 20-year-old secret, the key to Sterling's ruin, the key to her own liberation. Her quest for personal justice had just become a crusade for a ghost named Elias Vance. The storage unit in Queens was a small, windowless box that smelled of dust and forgotten time. Guided by Arthur Pendleton's precise instructions, Genevieve and Beatrice, armed with a powerful laptop and a set of adapters for obsolete technology, opened the door to the past. Inside was a single sealed plastic tub. Within it, carefully wrapped in anti-static bags, lay the digital relics of a stolen legacy, a clunky external hard drive, a stack of iOmega zip disks, and several leather-bound notebooks filled with Elias Vance's elegant, precise handwriting. It was a technological time capsule from the late 1990s. For the next 48 hours, fueled by coffee and a cold fury, the two women worked relentlessly in the conference room of Beatrice's law office. A tech expert, Beatrice trusted a man who owed her a significant favor, and asked no questions managed to carefully extract the data from the ancient hardware. What they found was explosive. The hard drive contained early date-stamped versions of the Prometheus protocol, all authored and saved under Elias Vance's name, predating the official incorporation of the company. There were scanned pages from his notebooks, detailing the mathematical proofs and conceptual framework. Most damningly, there were email chains between Elias and Sterling. The early emails were full of excitement and collaborative energy. Then the tone shifted. They saw Sterling's language change his use of I and my, becoming more prevalent. They found the email from Sterling, officially renaming the project from Prometheus to the Thorn encryption standard, with a flimsy excuse about marketability. The final emails from Elias were desperate, pleading, accusing Sterling of locking him out of their shared servers, the very servers that held his life's work. It was a step-by-step chronicle of a digital heist. "This is it," Beatrice said, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. "This isn't just a story. This is a provable timeline. The code, the notes, the emails, it completely dismantles Sterling's entire narrative. He didn't invent this. He stole it." But Genevieve was focused on the notebooks. While Beatrice saw legal evidence, Genevieve saw the man. Elias's handwriting was neat, his thoughts meticulously organized. He sketched diagrams in the margins and wrote notes to himself. The key is the non-linear key decay. Sterling doesn't get it yet. Tucked into the back pocket of the final notebook was a photograph. It was of two young men in graduation gowns, arms slung around each other, grinning at the camera. A younger, less cynical Sterling Thorn, and a pale, dark-haired man with kind, intelligent eyes, Elias Vance. Seeing his face made it all real. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a young man, full of promise, a genius on the cusp of changing the world, betrayed by the one person he should have been able to trust. Genevieve felt a profound connection to him, a kinship of the betrayed. Her fight was now his fight. "Pendleton was right," Genevieve said softly, tracing Elias's face in the photo. "We can't just go after Sterling for the affair. We have to correct the record. For him." Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was already whiteboarding a strategy. A direct lawsuit is slow. He'll bury us in motions and appeals for years. We need to hit him where he is most vulnerable, his public image and his stock price. We need to create a crisis of confidence so severe that the board has no choice but to oust him. The plan was a multi-pronged assault, an elegant and brutal piece of legal and public relations warfare. Phase 1 was legal. Beatrice's team would work in secret to locate any living relatives of Elias Vance. His parents were deceased, but a search revealed a younger sister, a quiet schoolteacher living in Oregon, who was estranged from Elias at the time of his death, largely due to Sterling's manipulations. Beatrice would fly out personally to present her with the evidence, preparing the groundwork for a massive lawsuit on behalf of Elias's estate for theft of intellectual property and wrongful death. Phase 2 was the corporate attack. Arthur Pendleton, after some persuasion from Genevieve, agreed to become their anonymous source. He would draft a detailed technical affidavit confirming that the code on the hard drives was without a doubt Elias Vance's original work. He would also provide a list of the most influential and respected members of the Thorn Dynamics Board of Directors, the ones who cared more about the company's stability than their personal loyalty to Sterling. Beatrice would package the evidence, the code, the emails, Pendleton's affidavit, and leak it directly and anonymously to these key board members. We won't give them the whole story at once, Beatrice explained, her eyes gleaming with tactical fervor. Just enough to plant a seed of doubt. A whisper in the boardroom, a question about the true origin of the algorithm. We'll let their own paranoia and self-interest do the work for us. They'll start digging. Phase 3 was the public execution. For this, they needed a storyteller, a journalist with unimpeachable credibility and a reputation for toppling giants. They chose Alistair Finch, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for the New York Times, known for his deep dives into corporate malfeasance. Genevieve would be the anonymous source, a family insider, providing him with a carefully curated selection of the evidence. They would hold back the most damning pieces, allowing him to build the story, verify the facts, and then detonate it with maximum impact. The key is the timing, Genevieve said, surprising Beatrice with her newfound strategic insight. The board gets the first whisper. They start to panic internally. Then, while they're off balance, Alistair Finch calls them for comment. That's when the real chaos begins. The next week was a blur of covert activity. Beatrice flew to Oregon and had a tearful transformative meeting with Elias Vance's sister, who was floored by the revelation about her brother's death and betrayal. Lawyers were retained. While that was happening, a secure encrypted data packet was delivered by courier to the homes of 3 specific board members of Thorn Dynamics. One was Eleanor Vance, a titan of industry with a fierce reputation for corporate governance, no relation to Elias, a fact that added a layer of cosmic irony. Another was General Markham, a retired 4-star general who sat on the board to oversee their government contracts and valued honor above all else. The third was the head of their largest institutional investor, a man whose only loyalty was to his shareholders' returns. Simultaneously, Genevieve had a clandestine meeting with Alistair Finch in a private room at a discreet downtown hotel. She laid out the story, presenting him with the initial layers of proof. Finch, a man who had seen everything, was visibly intrigued. The narrative of the brilliant deceased partner was compelling, but he needed more. Genevieve promised it to him, explaining that more evidence would be forthcoming as his investigation progressed. She had baited the hook. He was in. Back in the penthouse, Genevieve felt a strange sense of calm. She was the quiet center of a storm she was about to unleash. She looked at the ultrasound photo now framed on her bedside table. "I'm doing this for you," she thought. "So you know that your mother was a fighter." The first signal that the plan was working came from Arthur Pendleton. He called her on a secure line. "It's starting," he said, his voice tight with excitement. Eleanor Vance called an unscheduled governance review meeting. No phones allowed. The whispers have begun. The seed of doubt had been planted in the sterile, air-conditioned world of the Thorn Dynamics boardroom. Thousands of miles away, on the sun-drenched beaches of Locala Island, Sterling Thorn had no idea that the foundations of his kingdom were beginning to crack. He was busy planning a lavish birthday dinner, oblivious to the whispers that would soon become a roar. On Locala Island, the day of Sterling's 40th birthday dawned offensively perfect. The sky was a flawless cerulean, and a gentle breeze rustled the palms. He had arranged a private yacht excursion for Catalina, complete with champagne and a personal chef. As they sliced through the crystalline water, Catalina, clad in a microscopic bikini, draped herself over him, her phone never far from her hand. "Smile, darling," she cooed, snapping another photo for her millions of followers. Billionaire, birthday island life. Living my best life. Sterling forced a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. A sliver of unease had pierced his bubble of blissful arrogance. The night before, He had received a curt, encrypted email from Eleanor Vance requesting his immediate remote participation in an emergency board meeting scheduled for the following day. The reason cited was a vague but ominous, urgent matter of corporate provenance. It was an annoyance more than a threat. Eleanor was notoriously pedantic about governance, probably some new regulatory headache she wanted to grandstand about. He'd dialed in, dismissed her concerns about a rumor regarding intellectual property origins as baseless corporate espionage from a competitor, and assured them he would handle it decisively upon his return. He had projected an aura of unassailable confidence, and the board, for the most part, had seemed placated. Still, the word provenance had stuck in his craw. It was precise, academic. It was a word Genevieve would use. He shook the thought away. Impossible. His attention was pulled to his own phone, which buzzed with an alert from his wealth manager. Thorn Dynamics stock, usually a pillar of stability, had dipped by 3% in pre-market trading. It was a small, almost insignificant fluctuation, but it was unusual. He frowned. Probably just market jitters over the Fed interest rates, he muttered to himself. Catalina Oblivious was busy choosing a filter. "Did you say something, sweetie?" "Nothing important." He lied, forcing the tension from his shoulders. He was Sterling Thorn. His empire was unshakable. In New York, the storm was gathering force. Alistair Finch's article dropped on the front page of the New York Times' digital edition at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, precisely when the stock market opened. The headline was a bombshell: "The Ghost in the Machine. Questions arise over the true architect of Thorn Dynamics' billion-dollar algorithm." The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It didn't make any outright accusations of theft, but it meticulously laid out a series of deeply troubling questions. It detailed the life and genius of Elias Vance, citing anonymous early employees who described him as the undisputed visionary behind the company. It mentioned his tragic and sudden death just before the company's launch. It quoted cybersecurity experts who, after reviewing code fragments provided by Finch, noted that their structure was highly idiosyncratic and distinct from other work attributed to Sterling Thorn. Most devastatingly, Finch had unearthed and interviewed Elias's sister. Her quotes were heartbreaking, painting a picture of a brilliant, sensitive man who had sounded deeply distressed and had spoken of being pushed out by his partner in the weeks before his death. The article didn't have all the evidence Genevieve and Beatrice had held back, the most damning emails for the next phase, but it didn't need to. It cast a long, dark shadow of doubt over Sterling Thorn's entire life story. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. On Wall Street, trading of Thorn Dynamics stock Thorn was thrown into chaos. High-frequency trading algorithms programmed to react to negative news began selling off massive blocks of shares. The 3% dip became 5%, then 10%, then 15%. The ticker symbol glowed a sickening red on every financial news network. On his yacht, Sterling's phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. It was a cascade of alerts from his brokers, his PR team, his chief counsel. He opened the link to the Times article, his face draining of color as he read. The names Elias Vance Prometheus were ghosts resurrected from a tomb he thought was sealed forever. "What is it?" Catalina asked, annoyed that his attention was no longer on her. "Your stock is dipping. Just buy it back. That's what you do, right? Shut up!" He snapped, his voice a venomous hiss. Catalina recoiled, shocked. He had never spoken to her like that before. He was scrambling, his mind racing. This wasn't corporate espionage. This was an inside job. The details were too specific. But who, Pendleton? The old man didn't have the guts. Then he saw it. The mention of Elias's sister. The quotes about his fragile mental state. A detail only someone intimate with the story would know. A detail he had once told Genevieve in a moment of whiskey-fueled confession, to explain away his grief over his partner's death. Genevieve. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The quiet, docile art historian he had so carelessly discarded. The woman he thought he could silence by blocking her number. She was behind this. The thought was so outrageous, so impossible that it had to be true. His phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. Her voice was pure ice. "Sterling, you have 30 minutes to join an emergency video conference. The entire board will be present, and you had better have a damn good explanation for what I'm reading in the New York Times." The yacht suddenly felt like a cage. The perfect blue sky seemed to be closing in on him. He barked orders at the captain to return to the island immediately. He had to get to a secure line. He had to regain control. "What is going on, Sterling?" Catalina demanded, her voice shrill with panic as she saw the headlines popping up on her own news feed. "They're saying you stole everything. Is our trip going to be cut short?" Her vapid, self-absorbed concern was the last straw. "Our trip," he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "There is no our. Get your things. You're leaving." He was already thinking ahead, cutting losses. She was a liability, a piece of bad PR he didn't need right now. As the yacht sped back toward the shore, the digital storm raged. On social media, Thorn Dynamics Exposed was trending. Financial analysts were on television, grimly discussing the crisis of leadership and the potential for shareholder lawsuits. The myth of Sterling Thorn, the self-made genius, was being dismantled in real time, replaced by the story of a ruthless usurper. He stormed into his villa, casting one last look of utter contempt at a stunned Catalina, and slammed the door. He set up his laptop for the board meeting, his hands shaking with a rage so profound it made him feel sick. He had underestimated her. He had profoundly, catastrophically underestimated his quiet, gentle wife. While he had been sunning himself in paradise, she had been sharpening a blade, and she had just plunged it directly into the heart of his empire. The whispers had become a roar, and the sound was deafening. The video call with the board of directors was a digital bloodbath. Sterling, framed by the picturesque Fijian sunset, attempted to project an image of calm authority, but the 12 faces on his screen were a gallery of grim, unforgiving judges. Eleanor Vance led the prosecution, her voice sharp and devoid of sympathy. "Sterling, the allegations in the article are not just damaging. They are existential," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Our stock has lost 35% of its value in 3 hours. We have government contracts that rely on trust you have single-handedly incinerated. The board has been presented with anonymous evidence, including source code logs and technical affidavits that strongly suggest Elias Vance was the primary author of the Prometheus Protocol. I am going to ask you once. Is this true?" Sterling opened his mouth to lie, to weave the familiar narrative of collaboration, where his business acumen was the key ingredient. But one look at their faces, especially that of General Markham, a man who valued honor above all, told him the lie would not hold. They already knew. Elias was a brilliant contributor. Sterling hedged his voice, sounding hollow, even to his own ears. His work was foundational, but I was the one who... "That's not what the evidence shows," another board member interjected, cutting him off. "We've had our internal cybersecurity team review it. The coding language is his signature, not yours." The questions became a brutal cross-examination. Why was Elias Vance's name on none of the original patents? Why was his sister never contacted by the company after his death? Why was there a multi-million-dollar payout to a former engineer, Arthur Pendleton, structured as a lifetime consultancy for a non-existent role? His defenses were hollow, a series of blustering evasions that crumbled under their cold, factual assault. He was a king being unceremoniously deposed in a Zoom meeting. After an agonizing hour, Eleanor Vance delivered the final blow. The board has held a preliminary vote. We are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of Thorn Dynamics. Furthermore, we are freezing your assets and voting shares pending a full independent investigation into the company's intellectual property origins and the circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Elias Vance. "You can't do this," he snarled. "I am Thorn Dynamics." "Not anymore," General Markham said, his voice rumbling with disgust. "You've compromised the integrity of this entire organization. You're a liability, Thorn. Step down or we will remove you, publicly and messily." The call ended. Sterling was left staring at a black screen, the sound of the gentle waves outside a mocking counterpoint to the demolition of his life. A knock at the door confirmed the breathtaking speed of his ruin, the resort manager politely informing him his credit cards had been declined. His assets were frozen. Through the window, he saw Catalina being escorted to a water taxi, her mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage beside her. She glanced back at his villa, not with pity, but with a cold, calculating look before turning away for good. Alone, stripped of his power, his money and his mistress, there was only one person left he wanted to talk to. The architect of his destruction. With trembling fingers, he picked up his phone, unblocked Genevieve's number, and dialed. Back in the Fifth Avenue penthouse, Genevieve was calmly looking at paint swatches for the nursery. Her phone buzzed the screen, lighting up with a name she never thought she'd see again, Sterling Thorn. She saw the incoming call from Fiji, a desperate signal from his crumbling paradise. She listened to it ring once, twice, a third time. She thought of Elias Vance, of the child growing inside her, of the woman she had become. With a serene smile, she reached over and pressed the red decline button, silencing him. Sterling stared at his phone in disbelief. She had declined his call. She hadn't screamed or confronted him. She had simply dismissed him. In that moment, he understood the totality of his defeat. He had blocked her number to make her powerless, but she had declined his call to show him he was irrelevant. The sun had set, plunging his island prison into darkness. Paradise was lost, and he had no one to blame but himself. 6 months later, winter had settled over New York. The penthouse, her penthouse now, was no longer a gilded cage, but a peaceful sanctuary awaiting a new life. The fallout from Sterling's downfall had been absolute. Forced to resign in disgrace, his empire was systematically dismantled. A landmark settlement paid to Elias Vance's sister liquidated the majority of his fortune. Thorn Dynamics, in a desperate act of rebranding, was renamed Prometheus Innovations to honor its true founder. Sterling, a pariah drowning in legal battles and facing a reopened investigation into Elias's death, had become irrelevant. His attempts to contact Genevieve were met with a digital wall of silence. Genevieve, now heavily pregnant, had used her own substantial divorce settlement, not for vengeance, but for creation. She established the Vance Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing grants and mentorship to brilliant young engineers who lacked resources, ensuring no other genius would be silenced or exploited. With a happily retired Arthur Pendleton on its advisory board and Elias's sister as an honorary chair, the foundation was building a new legacy from the ashes of an old lie. The doorbell chimed, and Beatrice entered shaking snow from her coat and carrying a box. The first round of grant applications, she announced, her smile wide with pride. A young woman from MIT, with a new take on AI-driven medical diagnostics, a kid from Idaho. You're already changing lives, Jenan. Genevieve rested a hand on her stomach, feeling her daughter Eliana kick within. In the nursery, A photo of Elias Vance hung on the wall, a quiet guardian for the next generation. She finally understood true power. It wasn't in skyscrapers or stock prices. It was in the resilience to tear down a world of deceit and build a better one. Sterling had tried to block her out of his life, but he had only freed her. He had unwittingly unleashed a force for good, allowing her to create a world defined not by his lies, but by her strength and a legacy of truth for her child. This story isn't just about the fall of a powerful man. It's a testament to the incredible, often underestimated strength of a woman scorned. Genevieve's journey from a heartbroken wife to a master strategist reminds us that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest weapons. She didn't just get revenge. She sought justice, rewriting a history that was built on lies and giving a voice back to the man who had been silenced. Her story is a powerful reminder that integrity, intelligence, and a mother's fierce love are forces that no amount of money or power can ever truly defeat. If you were moved by Genevieve's incredible fight for justice and her ultimate triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the powerful and resilient people who refuse to be broken. The sound of the front door slamming shut was like a gunshot in the pouring rain, each drop that hit the cold pavement a tiny echo of his final words. "A baby now. You're trying to trap me, Celestine. I'm destined for more than this. More than you." He'd spat the words with a venom that chilled her more than the November wind whipping through her thin cardigan. Standing on the cracked stoop of their tiny apartment, with nothing but a worn handbag and the earth-shattering secret of her pregnancy, she watched his car's taillights disappear into the black, rain-slicked night. He thought he was leaving behind a poor, helpless waitress. He had no idea he was abandoning an heiress, and in that moment, as the cold seeped into her bones, the heartbroken woman began to fade, replaced by the calculating mind of Celestine Duval. He wanted more. He was about to lose everything. Life for Celestine had been a deliberate choice. It was an experiment in normalcy, a rebellion against the gilded cage she had been born into. The name Duval carried the weight of old money, of sprawling estates, and whispered conversations in boardrooms that decided the fate of corporations. But Celestine wanted none of it. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the trust fund that bore her name. So she had left. She'd changed her last name to a simple Graham, rented a small apartment on the industrial side of Westport, and found a job waiting tables at the corner bistro, a cozy place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. It was there she met Michael Peterson. He was charming, with an easy smile and eyes that held a universe of ambition. He was a junior project manager at a mid-tier real estate firm, and he spoke of blueprints and skyscrapers the way a poet speaks of love. He was captivated by her quiet grace, her genuine kindness, and he assumed her simple, uncomplicated background. To him, she was a blank canvas onto which he could paint his future. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared dreams, whispered over cheap diner coffee, and long walks in parks they couldn't afford to live near. He spoke of closing huge deals of one day, seeing his name on a building. She spoke of a home filled with laughter, a small garden, and the simple joy of a life built together. They married at the city courthouse 6 months later. Her family, or what was left of it, her stern, powerful grandfather, William Duval, was not informed. This life was hers, built on her own terms. The first year was a struggle, but a happy one. They pooled their meager earnings, celebrating small victories like fixing their rattling second-hand car or affording a night at the movies. Celestine was a master of stretching a dollar, turning their cramped apartment into a warm, inviting home. She supported Michael's ambition, typing up his reports late into the night and listening patiently as he rehearsed his presentations. She believed in him with an unwavering purity that he, in his heart of hearts, knew he didn't deserve. The first crack in their facade appeared in the form of Brenda Scott. Brenda was the daughter of a senior partner at Michael's firm. She was everything Celestine wasn't loud, impeccably dressed in designer labels, dripping with an casual arrogance that came from a lifetime of privilege. Michael started mentioning her name more and more often. Brenda thinks I should pitch the Riverside project directly to her father. Brenda invited me for drinks with some influential developers. Celestine felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. She noticed Michael becoming more critical of their life. The apartment he once called cozy was now cramped. Her carefully budgeted meals were boring. He started staying out late for networking, coming home smelling of expensive perfume and single malt scotch. He was changing, morphing into a man she didn't recognize, a man who looked at her not with love, but with a faint, dismissive pity. Then came the 2 blue lines on a plastic stick. Celestine's first feeling was pure, unadulterated joy. A baby. A tiny piece of them, a symbol of their love that would make their small home feel like a palace. She imagined telling Michael, pictured his face, lighting up the 2 of them, planning and dreaming for this new life. She waited for him to get home, her heart thrumming with nervous excitement, a special dinner she could barely afford simmering on the stove. He walked in late, his tie loosened a look of agitated triumph on his face. He didn't even notice the aroma of his favorite roast. "You will not believe the day I had—" he began, tossing his briefcase onto a chair. Brenda introduced me to Robert Finch, himself. The Robert Finch. He's looking for a hungry young executive for his new international division. This is it, Kat. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for. "Michael, that's wonderful," she said, her own news feeling suddenly small and inconvenient. "I have some news, too. Something amazing." He barely heard her, already pouring himself a drink. "This changes everything. No more scrimping. No more living in this dump. Finch's people live in the Heights. They drive German cars. Their wives sit on charity boards. They have connections. The unspoken words, they don't wait. Tables hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Taking a deep breath, she decided to forge ahead. "Michael, I'm pregnant." The words dropped into the room like a stone in a silent pond. The ambitious energy drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. He stared at her, then at her stomach, as if she had just confessed to a terrible crime. "Pregnant." He whispered the word laced with disgust. "You can't be." "I am," she said, her voice trembling. "We're going to have a baby." "No, you're going to have a baby." He snarled, his face contorting into a mask of rage. "I'm on the verge of breaking through, of finally getting the life I deserve, and you pull this, you're trying to trap me. A baby now. It's an anchor, Celestine. A dead weight. We can't afford it." "We'll manage," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "We always do. It will be a good thing, Michael, a blessing. A blessing." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that scraped at her soul. "It's a curse Finch isn't going to mentor a guy with a screaming baby and a broke wife. Brenda, her life is what I want. Parties travel influence, not dirty diapers and formula payments." The mention of Brenda's name was the final devastating blow. It laid everything bare. He wasn't just rejecting their child. He was rejecting her, their entire life together, in favor of a shallow, glittering prize. "So that's it," She choked out the reality crashing down on her. "You're just going to throw us away." "There is no us anymore," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "I'm going to stay at a friend's place. I need to think." But she knew he wasn't going to a friend's. He was going to Brenda. The next few days were a blur of unanswered calls and texts. Finally, a week later, he returned. Not to reconcile, but to pack. He moved with a cold, detached efficiency, throwing his clothes into a suitcase. He didn't look at her. "Michael, please," she begged one last time, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Don't do this to us, to our child." He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were those of a stranger. There was no love, no regret, only irritation. "I spoke to Brenda's father's lawyer," he said flatly. "He's drawing up divorce papers. He said it's a clean break. We have no assets, so there's nothing to divide." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few crumpled bills, $200, and threw them on the table. "This should cover you for a bit. It's all I have." It was the ultimate insult, the final cruel dismissal of their life together. And then came the words that would ignite the fire of her revenge. "Look, Celestine, you're a sweet girl, but you're not meant for the world I'm heading into. This is for the best. You'll find some other simple guy, and you can have your simple life. I'm destined for more than this, more than you." He picked up his suitcase and walked to the door. It had started to rain, a miserable grey drizzle that matched the color of her world. "Goodbye, Celestine." The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the tiny apartment, the final punctuation mark on her shattered dreams. She stood motionless for a long time, the $200 on the table mocking her. The rain outside turned into a downpour. She walked to the window and watched as his car, a newer model she didn't recognize, pulled away from the curb and disappeared. The tears finally came hot and furious. But beneath the grief, a different feeling was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. He thought she was poor, weak, and simple. He thought he could discard her and their unborn child like trash on his climb to the top. He had no idea who she really was. He had no conception of the power she could wield. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. In the desolate silence of her empty apartment, Celestine Graham died, and Celestine Duval, heiress to a billion-dollar fortune, began to plot her return. For 3 days, Celestine remained in the apartment, a ghost haunting the ruins of her life. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the drip of the leaky faucet and the mournful sound of the rain against the window pane. She didn't eat. She barely slept. Grief was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every object in the small space was a painful reminder. The coffee mug he used every morning, the worn armchair where he'd sit and read the photograph on the nightstand of their wedding day, their faces alight with a hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. On the 4th day, the morning sickness hit with a vengeance. Kneeling on the cold linoleum of the bathroom floor, utterly alone and miserable, Celestine knew she couldn't stay. This place, once a sanctuary of love, was now a tomb of memories. More importantly, she wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. A tiny new life was depending on her, and that life deserved more than a mother hollowed out by despair. Her fingers trembling, dialed a number she hadn't called in almost 3 years. It was a private line, one that bypassed secretaries and assistants, going straight to the oak-paneled study of the formidable man who ran the Duval empire. It rang once, twice. "William Duval." The voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, resonant, and clipped with an authority that commanded entire boardrooms. No hello, just a statement of fact. "Grandfather," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's Celestine." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound she could hear the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the background. When he spoke again, the sharpness in his tone was softened by a sliver of something she hadn't heard in years, concern. "Celestine." "Where are you?" The simple question broke her. The dam of her composure burst and she began to sob incoherent words, tumbling out between gasps. Michael, the divorce, the baby being thrown out. She told him everything, the whole humiliating, heartbreaking story. He listened without interruption. He didn't say, "I told you so," though he had every right. He had warned her that the world outside their rarefied air was often cruel, that a man might be tempted by her spirit, but ultimately unable to resist the siren song of her fortune if he knew of it. Instead, he had allowed her to run her experiment in normalcy, and now it had failed spectacularly. When she finally fell silent, her breath hitching, he spoke with quiet, steely resolve. "Jonathan will be there in 3 hours. He'll have a car waiting. Pack what you need. You're coming home." Jonathan Cole was the Duval family's chief legal counsel and William's most trusted confidant. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes, a razor-sharp mind, and an unwavering loyalty to the family he had served for 3 decades. When he arrived at her apartment, his expression was a mask of professional calm, but his eyes held a deep sympathy as he took in the shabby surroundings and Celestina's pale, tear-streaked face. He didn't pry or ask questions. He simply managed everything. He arranged for a moving company to pack and store her belongings. He dealt with the landlord settling the lease. He gently guided a numb Celestine into the back of a black, discreet sedan with tinted windows. As the car pulled away from the curb, she took one last look at the building at the window of the life she had tried to build and felt a profound sense of loss, but also, for the first time in days, a flicker of safety. The journey to the Duval estate was like traveling between different worlds. They left the grey industrial landscape of the city behind, driving through rolling hills and pristine countryside until they reached a set of imposing wrought-iron gates. The gates swung open silently, and the car proceeded down a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The mansion rose before them, a symphony of stone and glass that looked both timeless and modern. It was the house she grew up in, a place she had once felt suffocated by, but now represented an unbreachable fortress. Her grandfather was waiting for her in the grand entrance hall. William Duval was tall and silver-haired, still imposing in his late 70s. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his posture ramrod straight. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple clothes, and the exhaustion etched on her face. For a moment, she feared his disapproval, his reprimand. Instead, he simply opened his arms. Celestine fell into them, and for the first time since she was a little girl, she let her grandfather hold her, his strength a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm of her life. "Welcome home, my dear," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. We'll take care of everything." The weeks that followed were a period of quiet healing and slow rebirth. Celestine was given a suite of rooms overlooking the sprawling gardens. The finest doctors were brought in to oversee her pregnancy. A nutritionist planned her meals. The quiet, efficient household staff catered to her every need, creating a cocoon of comfort that allowed her body and soul to begin mending. But it was more than just physical recovery. William and Jonathan began the process of reawakening the part of her she had long suppressed, the Duval mind. They didn't coddle her or treat her like a fragile victim. They treated her like the heiress she was. Meetings were held in the vast library, surrounded by the scent of old leather and wood polish. Jonathan Cole, with meticulous care, walked her through the legalities of the divorce. "Michael Peterson has no idea who you are." Jonathan explained, his tone calm and precise. He filed for a standard no-fault divorce against Celestine Graham, a waitress with no declared assets. We will not contest it. We will let it proceed quietly and quickly. For now, Celestine Graham needs to disappear. And then Celestine asked, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. And then her grandfather interjected, his eyes glinting with a cold fire. We begin the education of Celestine Duval. You ran from this world once, child. Now you will learn to command it. Her days took on a new structure. Mornings were spent with tutors not in literature or art, but in finance, corporate law, and market analysis. She learned about stock portfolios, hostile takeovers, and leveraged buyouts. She discovered a natural aptitude for numbers and strategy, a part of her brain that had lain dormant during her simple life. Afternoons were spent with her grandfather. He would walk her through the intricate web of Duval Industries, a global conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and sustainable energy. He taught her about power, not just the overt kind that came with wealth, but the subtle, more potent kind that came from information, patience, and impeccable timing. Revenge is not a storm, Celestine, he told her one afternoon, as they stood before a large window overlooking the estate. A storm is loud, chaotic, and passes quickly. True revenge is like the changing of a season. It is inevitable, patient, and all-encompassing. It changes the entire landscape, and your adversary doesn't realize it's winter until he's frozen solid. 7 months later, Celestine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Liam. Holding her son in her arms for the first time, she felt a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. Looking down at his perfect tiny face, she made a silent vow. She would build a world for him, where he would never want for anything, a world safe from the likes of men like Michael Peterson. But she would also ensure that the man who had so cruelly discarded them would one day understand the magnitude of what he had thrown away. Liam was not her anchor. He was her purpose. The next 3 years were a blur of intense transformation. While nannies and staff helped care for Liam, allowing Celestine to focus, she was a deeply involved and loving mother. Her evenings and weekends were reserved solely for him, but her days were dedicated to her new role. She was no longer her grandfather's pupil. She was his protégé, his right hand. She shed the last vestiges of the timid waitress. Her simple clothes were replaced by a wardrobe of bespoke power suits and elegant dresses. She learned to command a room with a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any shout. She wasn't just playing a part, she had fully inhabited the identity she was born to. She was Celestine Duval, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions for Duval Industries, and she was finally ready to return to Westport. Not as a victim, but as a predator. While Celestine was being reborn in the crucible of corporate power, Michael Peterson's life was exactly what he had dreamed it would be. Or so it appeared on the surface. He married Brenda Scott 6 months after his divorce from Celestine was finalized. It was a lavish affair featured in the society pages, a testament not to love, but to a successful merger of ambition and assets. They bought a sprawling minimalist house in the exclusive neighborhood of Sterling Heights, a glass and steel monstrosity with more windows than warmth. Their life was a carefully curated performance for an audience of their peers. They drove matching silver sports cars, attended all the right charity galas, and vacationed in places designed to be geotagged on social media. Michael had indeed gotten his promotion. With Brenda's father a senior partner at the firm, as his father-in-law, his ascent was swift. He was now a director of development, managing significant projects. He had the title, the salary, and the respect he craved. Yet a strange emptiness gnawed at him. His relationship with Brenda was transactional. Their conversations revolved around stock prices, social engagements, and which rival couple they were outperforming. There was none of the genuine warmth, the easy laughter he had once shared with Celestine. Sometimes, late at night, a fleeting image of her kind smile would flicker in his mind, but he would quickly banish it, dismissing it as a relic of a past he had wisely escaped. He never once wondered what became of her or the baby. In his mind, she had simply faded back into the obscurity from which he'd plucked her. Celestine's return to Westport was not announced with a trumpet blast, but with the quiet, seismic tremor of a new corporate player entering the market. A new investment firm, CD Holdings, was incorporated. The name was deliberately anonymous, the CD, a private nod to her identity. The firm's stated purpose was to invest in innovative urban renewal and high-tech commercial real estate, Michael Peterson's exact professional territory. Jonathan Cole acted as the public face of CD Holdings, its seasoned and impeccably discreet CEO. Celestine remained entirely in the shadows, the firm's mysterious, unseen chairperson. From a sleek, state-of-the-art office on the top floor of the city's newest skyscraper, a building her own company now owned, she began to meticulously map out Michael's world. She had her research team compile a complete dossier on him, his career trajectory, his current projects, his professional strengths, and more importantly, his weaknesses. She knew Michael better than anyone. She knew his desperate need for approval from powerful men. She knew his ego was both massive and fragile, and she knew his fatal flaw: he was a gambler who always overestimated his own intelligence. He wasn't a true visionary. He was a salesman who was good at packaging other people's ideas. The first move was subtle. Michael's firm, Scott & Sterling Realty, was the front-runner for the highly coveted Titan Point development project, a massive undertaking to redevelop a derelict industrial waterfront into a luxury mixed-use complex of condos, retail, and office space. It was the project that would make Michael's career, cementing his status as a major player in the city. Just as Scott & Sterling were preparing their final bid, CD Holdings made a stunning, unsolicited offer to the city council. Their proposal was bolder, better funded, and technologically superior. It included plans for a green energy grid, integrated smart city technology, and public art installations. It made the Scott & Sterling bid look provincial and outdated. The city council was flawed. CD Holdings seemingly came out of nowhere, yet they had the financial backing and the vision to blow the established competition out of the water. The Titan Point project was awarded to them unequivocally. The fallout at Scott & Sterling was immediate. Michael's father-in-law was furious. Michael himself was humiliated. He had personally overseen the bid, assuring everyone it was a guaranteed win. At a tense dinner with Brenda and her parents, he was openly berated. "Who the hell are these CD Holdings people?" Brenda's father fumed. "They came out of nowhere and made you look like an amateur Michael." "It's a setback, that's all," Michael said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "They got lucky. I'll find out who they are. I'll beat them on the next one." This was exactly what Celestine had anticipated. She hadn't just taken the project, she had wounded his pride. A wounded, prideful man makes mistakes. A few weeks later, Jonathan Cole, as CEO of CD Holdings, announced a secondary phase of the Titan Point project, the construction of a landmark 50-story corporate headquarters, the Duval Tower. To foster local partnerships, CD Holdings would be subcontracting the management of this specific construction to a reputable local firm. It was a trap baited with the most irresistible lure imaginable, a chance for Michael to get a piece of the very project he had lost. It was an opportunity for him to save face, to prove to his father-in-law that he could play in the big leagues. As expected, Michael scrambled, using every ounce of his influence and his father-in-law's connections to get a meeting with Jonathan Cole. Celestine watched the video feed from a hidden camera in the boardroom, her face impassive. She saw Michael a little heavier now, his smile a little more forced, enter the room and shake Jonathan's hand. He was a sycophant, lavishing praise on CD Holdings' vision, desperate to be a part of it. Jonathan played his role perfectly. He was courteous but aloof, letting Michael do most of the talking. He made it clear that CD Holdings was looking for a partner who was aggressive, forward-thinking, and willing to take calculated risks. Michael, eager to impress, boasted about his past successes and promised to deliver the project under budget and ahead of schedule. He was practically begging. At the end of the meeting, Jonathan leaned back. "We'll consider your firm's proposal, Mr. Peterson. However, our board requires a significant personal commitment from our partners. A sign of good faith. We'd expect the managing firm to take a substantial equity stake in the tower's construction phase. It ensures all parties are fully invested in the success of the project." It was an unusual but not unheard of request. It was also the core of Celestine's trap. Michael saw it as his chance. By investing personally, he'd show CD Holdings he had skin in the game, and the potential return on investment was astronomical. He went back to Brenda, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "This is it," he told her. "This is how we get back on top. We're going to invest in this tower, all of it. We'll leverage our house, use your portfolio. The payout will be legendary." Brenda, blinded by the same greed, readily agreed. They liquidated their assets, took out a second mortgage, and poured every last cent they had, and some they borrowed into securing the partnership for the construction of Duval Tower. The contract was signed. Michael Peterson was now personally and financially tied to Celestine's project. The first phase of her plan was complete. The chess pieces were set. Now she would begin to slowly, methodically squeeze. Her social re-entry was planned with the same strategic precision. She chose the annual Westport Charity Ball, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, as her debut. It was the one event Michael and Brenda would never miss. Celestine arrived late, making a deliberate entrance. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and around her neck was a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace, the Duval star. She was no longer the soft, unassuming girl who had waited tables. She was a vision of power, wealth, and unattainable grace. A murmur went through the ballroom. "Who is that?" people whispered. She didn't walk. She glided Jonathan Cole at her side, parting the sea of Westport's elite. Michael and Brenda were standing by the champagne fountain, holding court. Michael was mid-laugh, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face, when he saw her. He froze. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. It wasn't a sudden recognition. It was a slow, horrifying dawning. He saw a face that was achingly familiar, yet utterly transformed. The same soft curve of her jaw, the same deep brown eyes. But now they held an icy confidence he had never seen. The name Celestine formed in his mind, but his brain refused to connect this goddess of industry with the poor, pathetic wife he had discarded in the rain. It was impossible. Brenda noticed his distraction. "Michael, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Celestine chose that exact moment to turn her head, her eyes meeting Michael's across the crowded room. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She simply held his gaze, her expression a perfect, unreadable blank. And in that chillingly neutral stare, he knew it was her. His blood ran cold. The entire foundation of his world tilted violently on its axis. Celestine, here, looking like that. It made no sense. His past was colliding with his present in a way he could never have imagined. He felt a primal, gut-wrenching fear. This was not a coincidence. She was the ghost at his feast, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had come for him. The weeks following the charity ball were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Celestine never approached Michael directly. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was a constant, unnerving pressure. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. Her name, Celestine Duval, was suddenly on everyone's lips, whispered in awe at the exclusive clubs and high-powered lunch meetings that formed the battleground of Westport's elite. She was the mysterious, brilliant chairperson of CD Holdings, the new queen of the city's real estate scene. Michael was in a state of barely controlled panic. He tried to explain the impossible situation to Brenda, but the words came out as frantic, nonsensical babbling. "She's my ex-wife, the waitress," he insisted one night, pacing their cold white living room like a caged animal. Brenda scoffed, examining her freshly manicured nails. "Michael, don't be ridiculous. Your ex-wife was some mousy little thing named Celestine Graham. This is Celestine Duval, of the Duval Industries Duvals. You're just stressed about the tower project. Perhaps you should see someone." His inability to make her believe him isolated him further. He was trapped in a nightmare only he could see. He would catch glimpses of Celestine at industry events, a brief, chilling eye contact across a boardroom, the scent of her subtle, expensive perfume as she passed him in a hallway. Each encounter was a small, sharp stab of terror. She was a living embodiment of the secret he had buried, now returned as a spectre of immense power. Meanwhile, construction on the Duval Tower began. On the surface, everything was proceeding perfectly. Michael threw himself into the project, working feverishly, hoping that a massive success would somehow appease the ghost he couldn't shake. He held meetings, approved schematics, and gave confident presentations to Jonathan Cole, all while Celestine's invisible presence loomed over him. This was when she began to tighten the screws. The first problem was a shipment of specialized structural steel from a German supplier, a supplier CD Holdings had recommended. The shipment was delayed by weeks due to a sudden customs issue. Michael scrambled his frantic calls to the supplier, met with polite but unhelpful bureaucracy. The delay put the entire project behind schedule, and the penalty clauses in their contract were draconian. Every day of delay cost Michael and Brenda a fortune. Next came the geological survey reports. A CD Holdings independent consultant discovered unforeseen soil instability on a small section of the build site, right where a critical foundation pillar was to be poured. The original surveys which Michael had signed off on had shown no issues. Now major time-consuming and incredibly expensive reinforcement work was required. Michael's budget, already strained, began to hemorrhage money. He confronted Jonathan Cole, his voice tight with accusation. "These problems are coming out of nowhere. The steel supplier you insisted on the soil reports. It feels like sabotage." Jonathan looked at him over the rim of his glasses, his expression one of mild disappointment. "Mr. Peterson, are you suggesting CD Holdings would sabotage its own flagship project? We are a multi-billion-dollar corporation. This tower is a matter of legacy for us. Perhaps the issue isn't sabotage, but a lack of sufficient oversight on your part. Due diligence is, after all, your responsibility." The veiled threat was clear. Any attempt to blame CD Holdings would be framed as his own incompetence. He was trapped. At home, the atmosphere turned toxic. As their financial situation worsened, Brenda's support curdled into relentless criticism. "What do you mean the budget is overrun by 30%? She shrieked, waving a bank statement in his face. "That was my inheritance. You promised me this was a sure thing." "Michael, it's just temporary," he insisted. "Once we get past these initial hurdles, it will be fine." But it wasn't fine. A local investigative journalist, tipped off by an anonymous source from Celestine's team, began publishing a series of articles about potential safety shortcuts and environmental violations at the Duval Tower construction site. The accusations were baseless, cleverly worded allegations and leading questions, but they were enough to trigger a full-scale investigation by the city's Safety Commission. Work on the tower was officially halted. The financial bleed became a torrent. The interest on their loans was piling up. Creditors started calling. The friends they had cultivated in their social circle began to distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with a failing project and a man whose reputation was rapidly disintegrating. Michael was a man on the edge. He was losing his money, his career, and his wife, whose contempt for him was now palpable. He started drinking heavily, his days a blur of panicked phone calls, and his nights a haze of alcohol-fueled despair. Celestine observed his downfall from her serene, top-floor office, watching it unfold on spreadsheets, reports, and covertly recorded phone calls. There was no joy in it for her, only a cold, grim satisfaction. This was not about pleasure. It was about justice. It was about deconstructing, piece by painful piece, the arrogant man who believed he was destined for more. The final public humiliation was meticulously planned. The Westport Financial Gazette was preparing its annual Titans of Industry issue, celebrating the city's most influential business leaders. Michael, before his fall, had been slated for a feature. Celestine, through a strategic PR move, arranged to be the cover story. The magazine hit the newsstands on a Monday morning. There she was on the cover of every copy in the city. Celestine Duval, her expression poised and confident, under the headline, "The Architect of Tomorrow, How Celestine Duval is Reshaping the Westport Skyline." Inside was a glowing 10-page spread detailing her vision, her business acumen, and the incredible success of CD Holdings. And buried deep within the article was a single devastating paragraph. Duval's flagship project, the magnificent Duval Tower, has not been without its challenges. The project, initially subcontracted to local developer Michael Peterson of Scott & Sterling Realty, has been plagued by significant delays and massive budget overruns. Sources close to the project cite a catastrophic failure of management on Peterson's part. CD Holdings has since moved to sever ties with Peterson and his firm, with a spokesperson confirming they will be taking direct control to steer the project back to its original path of excellence. It was a professional execution delivered in cold corporate print. Michael read it in his office, the magazine trembling in his hands. That same morning, an email arrived from Jonathan Cole, formally terminating their contract and initiating legal action to recoup the financial losses incurred due to his gross negligence. Attached was a bill for damages that ran into the tens of millions of dollars, a sum that would not only bankrupt him and Brenda, but would leave them in debt for the rest of their lives. An hour later, his father-in-law summoned him. The older man didn't rage. He was worse. He was coldly dismissive, looking at Michael as if he were a bug. "You're a disgrace, Michael. You've not only ruined yourself, you've tarnished my firm's name. You're fired. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out." As Michael stumbled out of the office, in a daze carrying a cardboard box with his personal effects, he saw his colleagues whispering, avoiding his gaze. They had all seen the magazine. He was no longer a rising star. He was a pariah. When he got home, Brenda was waiting for him, her bags already packed. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "My father called me," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "He told me everything. You didn't just lose our money. You lost it all while chasing the ghost of your pathetic little ex-wife. She played you for a fool, and you were too stupid and arrogant to see it. Our marriage is over. My lawyers will be in touch." She walked past him without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the vast, empty house that the bank would soon be repossessing. The silence was absolute. He was utterly destroyed. He had lost his job, his reputation, his wife, and every penny he had. The glittering world he had betrayed Celestine for had crumbled to dust around him, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that she had been the architect of it all. He had called her an anchor, a dead weight. But she had been the ground beneath his feet, and now that she was gone, he was in a free fall with no end in sight. A week later, Michael was living in a cheap, pay-by-the-week motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. His bespoke suits were gone, sold for a fraction of their worth to a consignment shop. His silver sports car had been repossessed. He spent his days in a fog of cheap whiskey, watching the ceiling, the same question echoing in the hollow chamber of his mind. Why he understood that Celestine was behind his ruin, but he couldn't grasp the scale of it, the sheer, ruthless efficiency of her revenge. The waitress he had discarded with $200 had returned as a corporate titan and dismantled his entire existence without ever speaking a single word to him. The sheer impossibility of it gnawed at his sanity. Then his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Duval will grant you a meeting, the Chartwell restaurant, tomorrow, 8 p.m. Be punctual." The Chartwell. It was the most exclusive, expensive restaurant in Westport, a place he had taken Brenda to celebrate his promotion, a place where a single meal cost more than a month's rent at this motel. The invitation was another calculated cruelty, a reminder of the world he had lost. But he knew he had to go. He needed answers. He needed to face her. He spent his last few dollars on a dry-cleaned shirt and trousers. When he arrived at the restaurant, the maître d', who had once greeted him by name, looked down his nose at him with disdain. "I have a reservation," Michael mumbled, feeling the eyes of the other patrons on him. "For Duval." The name was magic. The maître d's expression changed instantly. "Of course, sir. Right this way." He was led to a secluded corner table with a panoramic view of the city lights, the very skyline Celestine was now reshaping. And there she was. She looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. There was no ostentatious jewelry, just the quiet, unshakable confidence of a person completely in command of her world. She didn't rise as he approached. She simply watched him, her brown eyes giving nothing away. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly. A waiter instantly appeared to fill his water glass. "Celestine," he began, his voice hoarse. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" she replied, her voice calm and even. It was the first time she had spoken to him in over 4 years, and the sound of it, so devoid of the warmth he remembered, was like a shard of ice in his gut. "I think you do. You just don't want to accept it." She gestured for the waiter. "Would you like something to drink, Michael? I imagine you can't afford their scotch anymore." The casual cruelty of her words stung more than any shout. "Why are you doing this?" he pleaded. "To ruin me, was it all for this? To see me like this? Ruin you?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Michael, you were ruined long before I came back. You were a hollow man, chasing a hollow dream. I didn't ruin you. I simply held up a mirror and forced you to look at your own reflection. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intensifying. You threw me out into the street. Pregnant, you tossed $200 at me as if I were a piece of trash you were paying to have hauled away. You told me I was an anchor, a weight holding you back from your great destiny. You abandoned your own child without a second thought. I didn't know, he stammered. I didn't know about your family, about the money. And that is your greatest failing, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word carried the force of a hammer blow. You thought my worth was tied to my bank account. You assumed that because I was a waitress, because I lived in a small apartment and budgeted for groceries, that I was worthless. You saw my love, my support, my belief in you as having no value. You saw our unborn child as nothing more than a financial liability. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone. She swiped the screen and placed it on the table, turning it to face him. On the screen was a photograph, a beautiful little boy about 4 years old, with Celestine's warm eyes and a smile that lit up his entire face. He was sitting on the shoulders of a handsome, silver-haired man, William Duval, in a sun-drenched garden, laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. His name is Liam, Celestine said, her voice softening for the first time, filled with a fierce maternal pride. He is brilliant and funny and kind. He loves to build things with his blocks. He thinks he can talk to dogs. He is the greatest joy in my life. He is your son. Michael stared at the picture, his breath catching in his throat. A son. A happy, thriving child who had no idea he even existed. The image of that laughing boy was a physical blow more painful than the loss of his career, his money, or his wife. It was the gaping, undeniable proof of what he had truly thrown away. It wasn't just an heiress and her fortune. It was a family. It was a life. He is everything, Celestine continued, her voice regaining its steel. And you are nothing to him. I did all of this for him, to create a world for him that you could never touch, to ensure that men with souls as bankrupt as yours could never harm him. This wasn't just about payback, Michael. It was about building a fortress. Your destruction was simply the quarry from which I sourced the stone. Tears streamed down Michael's face. The full crushing weight of his choices finally landed on him. He saw it all, his greed, his cruelty, his monumental stupidity. Celestine, I'm sorry. He sobbed the words pathetic and useless. Please, let me see him. Let me try to be a father. Celestine slowly pulled the phone back, the image of his son disappearing. Her face was a mask of cold finality. No, she said. The word was absolute. You forfeited that right the night you slammed a door in the face of your pregnant wife. Liam has a family that adores him. He has love. He has stability. He has a grandfather who is teaching him about honor and integrity. He doesn't need a father, especially not one like you. She stood up, her movements fluid and graceful. She placed a few crisp $100 bills on the table. For your meal, she said, echoing his own cruel gesture from years ago. And a bit extra. It should cover you for a while. It's all I have for you. She turned and walked away, not looking back. Michael sat there utterly broken, amidst the clinking glasses and quiet chatter of a world he no longer belonged to. He was a ghost, haunted not by what he had lost, but by the irrefutable knowledge that he had willingly, arrogantly thrown it all away. In the end, Celestine's revenge wasn't a fiery inferno, but a quiet, creeping ice age that froze Michael Peterson out of the life he so desperately coveted. He became a cautionary tale, whispered among the city's elite. The last anyone heard, he was working a low-wage job in a different state, a gaunt, anonymous man crushed by the weight of his past. Brenda, having divorced him, eventually married a wealthier older man, continuing her life of transactional relationships. Celestine, however, did not dwell on the past. The empire she had built was not founded on vengeance, but on a vision for the future. Duval Tower, completed under her direct supervision, became an award-winning landmark, a symbol of innovation, and a testament to her strength. She continued to run CD Holdings with a blend of her grandfather's ruthless pragmatism and her own innate compassion, becoming one of the most respected and powerful figures in the industry. But her greatest success was not in the boardroom. It was in the sprawling gardens of the Duval estate, chasing after a laughing little boy named Liam. She had found her true purpose, not in tearing a man down, but in building a life of love, stability, and boundless opportunity for her son. She had once sought a simple life to be loved for who she was, and in a way, she had found it. Her life was now defined not by the Duval billions, but by bedtime stories, scraped knees, and the unconditional love of her child. She was no longer a runaway heiress or a scorned wife. She was simply a mother, and in that she found a wealth far greater than any fortune. She was the architect of her own life, and it was a masterpiece. The story of Celestine Duval is a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is never defined by their circumstances. It's a testament to the incredible strength that can be born from betrayal and the ultimate victory of living a successful, happy life. If her journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience and fighting for the life you deserve, then please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know this story moved. You share it with someone who might need to hear a message of strength, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll join a community that loves compelling stories like this, and you won't miss out on our next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to build your own fortress.